Alright, this video is about going through numbers 1 through 4 of your Unit 6 review. The first two, we want to go ahead and find the domain and range of the function. So the first thing I'm going to do for number 1 is actually go to y equals and into our calculator. This is around x minus 6, and then also parentheses around 4x minus 20. Alright, we're going to graph. Okay, it's not very descriptive, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at our table as well. So second, y equals. Alright, so notice we have an error at 5, which makes sense because if I set the bottom equal to 0, I get 5, x equals 5, and that's going to actually be my VA. So my domain is going to be pretty much everything but my VA. So it's going to go from negative infinity to 5, 5 to infinity. Okay? And with my range, I'm going to take a look at my graph here. So notice, it actually doesn't go through a certain horizontal asymptote. Let's put my table again. If I keep on going to really large x values, it's actually getting closer to a certain value, and it looks like 5. If I go towards the other direction, really high negative values, or really low negative values if you think of it that way on the number line, notice it's decreasing down to a certain number and looks like it's going to be 0.25 as well. Okay, now I would say it's 0.25 because if I look at the coefficients here, there's a x to the first and x to the first, so the exponents are the same. There's an imaginary 1 over and that 4 there. So my range is going to go from negative infinity to 1/4 and 1/4 to infinity. So in this case, my domain is everything but my vertical asymptote, and my range is everything but my horizontal asymptote. So let's go ahead and actually graph number 2. Squared minus 16 in parentheses divided by x. Alright, let's graph. Now it looks like just from the start, it's going to be one of those questions where we have asymptote, where there is no HA. Okay, just because I know if you take a look at your graph, it's kind of like the branches are slanted. Okay, for my domain, I'm going to take a look at my table here by hitting second graph. Alright, before I was in those really low negative numbers. So I'm going to scroll down, and everything that has a y value is part of my domain. Looks like I have an error at 0, and that makes sense because if I set the bottom equal to 0, I get x equals 0. If I keep on going, looks like everything's good. And on my graph, if my VA is at 0, if I start from the left, there is part of a graph, and then it's eventually getting really close to that 0. Same thing over here, it picks back up after that 0. So my domain is going to go from negative infinity to 0, and then picks back up after 0, goes to positive infinity. My range, if I look at my graph here, start at the bottom, this part of the graph is going to keep on going on and on and on forever down, as well as this part. So as I go up, there's nothing that I'm skipping over, no gaps that I'm skipping over. And this part of the graph is going to keep on going up to those really high y values, as well as this part of the graph is going to keep on going up to those really high y values. So my range in this case is actually going to be from negative infinity to infinity. Alright, so that's domain range. That's actually pretty tough without looking at the graph. So part number 3, we have to find the VA and the HA, and then we just have to label it. Okay, so our VA for number 3, we have to set the bottom equal to 0. So my VA is 7/3. My HA, well, let's take a look at this one. The exponent, the highest exponent in the numerator is 2, and the highest exponent in the denominator is 1. So we have to remember those 3 rules about HA, and I'll put them over here. The first one, if the top exponent is less than the bottom, y equals 0 is my HA. The second case, if they're equal to each other, in number 1, my HA is pretty much the leading coefficients. Okay, and then the last case is if the top is greater than the bottom, we have in number 3, we have no HA. It's going to be a slant asymptote. And we don't have to figure out the slant asymptote for our class, but eventually if you go on to pre-calc you will. So here, our HA, there is none. Alright, so if we go to number 4, BA, we're going to take the denominator of the fraction, so x minus 8 set equal to 0. Okay, remember this is because we can't let the bottom of the fraction equal 0, so the only event that would make it equal to 0 is 8. So my VA is 8. My HA, so I'm going to take a look at this fraction. Okay, the top and the bottom, the degree is the same, so we're going to look at the leading coefficient. 1 over 1. 1. But then we also have this minus 3 on the outside. Okay, so my HA is actually going to be negative 2. This is a trick problem, and it's not too bad as long as you remember these 3 rules, but it's an extra step there. Alright? So these are the answers to 1 through 4. Hopefully, if you have any questions, make sure to ask your teacher.